Many people think that Buddhism teaches us to suppress our emotions or to detach from them. But is this really true? In this video, what I want to do is to look at some of the early Buddhist teachings on emotions, on what they are, on how we can work with them, how we can transform them, and why these kinds of teachings continue to be relevant to our practice today. First, we should discuss what emotions are in early Buddhism, how they're viewed. And in this context, it's important to make a distinction. There are certain states that are analogized as emotions within extraordinary meditative states of mind. However, these states, although they're analogized as emotions, they function somewhat differently. And so I'm going to leave those aside for the purposes of this video. That is to say, leave aside those states that occur in extraordinary states of meditative insight or meditative experience, and focus instead in this video on more ordinary types of emotions. In early Buddhism, emotions are viewed as essentially natural phenomena that arise, that persist, and that pass away due to causes and conditions. Happiness or sadness, joy or sorrow, love or hatred. These kinds of emotions, they arise due to contact with certain kinds of sense objects in our environment, and again, they pass away in time. In Buddhist practice, it's often most skillful simply to view these emotions as regular, ordinary parts of our environment, to view them neutrally. In this way, seen in this way, emotions themselves are not a problem. They're not the problem. They arise and pass, as all things do. The problem is that we tend to get attached to the pleasant emotions, and we tend to resist the unpleasant emotions. In this way, for example, we may be happy one day, but as that happiness dissipates, as it ordinarily will, as it always will, we become sad or upset or pained in some way because of the loss of that happiness. Becoming aware of the transient nature of all of our emotions can help us to release our attachment to them so that we don't suffer so much as they pass away, so that we aren't constantly being either attached or aversive to whatever sorts of emotions arise. Second, I want to discuss options for transforming some of our emotions. While it is generally true that we should view our emotions neutrally as unproblematic and as arising and passing due to causes and conditions, it's also true within early Buddhism that certain emotions are seen as inherently unskillful or unhelpful to us, unhealthy. A key one of these, perhaps the key one, is anger or hatred. This is viewed as an emotion which, on the one hand, is of course painful to us when we feel it, but it also can be painful to the people around us insofar as we act out on that anger or hatred through actions or through speech. Now, there are various ways that we can try to counteract that emotion of anger when it arises so that we don't act out in unskillful ways. Perhaps the foremost of these is a practice of kindness or loving kindness. The Pali word is metta. This is a practice, it can even be a formal meditative practice where we sit down in formal meditation in a quiet space, focus on breathing to begin with to quiet the mind, and then try to find some avenue towards a feeling of kindness. That is, bring to mind something that makes kindness arise in us. The current Theravada meditation teacher, Ajahn Brahm, talks about bringing to mind a pet. Thinking of that pet may just immediately bring kindness to mind. Or we could bring to mind somebody, a benefactor in our lives, somebody who's helped us a great deal. A parent, a great friend. That sort of person is somebody that we automatically feel kindness towards. And when we touch into that feeling of kindness, then we can work with it and try to bring it out into the rest of the world. We can work with this through phrases such as may they be well, may they be happy, may they be healthy, may they be safe, may they be at peace. And then we can expand that over a practice, over a lengthy practice. We can try to expand that out to encompass the whole world. May all sentient beings, may all beings be at peace. May all beings be happy and well. May all beings be safe. We can also consider a practice of compassion in certain circumstances. One of these might be if somebody is difficult in our lives. Again, in these cases, it's generally best to begin with somebody who's a little bit difficult, not the most difficult person. We think of that person, that somewhat difficult person, and we try to consider what is behind their being nasty in the way that they are. How are they hurting? How are they suffering? How is the suffering in their life causing them to act out? If we can think in that way and try to figure out these background causes and conditions, they may help us to generate compassion for them. Compassion for their suffering that's causing them illness, that's causing them to act out in ways that hurt other people around them. And that kind of practice can again help to mitigate this anger we feel. Or if we're feeling resentment or jealousy because of somebody else's success in life, because somebody else is happy, then we might consider a practice of sympathetic joy, what's known as mudita in Pali. This is a practice of taking joy in the successes and happiness of other people. Now again, we begin small. It's best to begin small. We begin perhaps with somebody that we already feel kindness towards. We begin with this, perhaps this pet or this benefactor, good friend, and we think of them as being successful in whatever way they are. We think of them as being happy in whatever way they are, and allow that to generate in us this feeling of sympathetic joy, of joy in their doing well, joy in their well-being. And then again, we work to expand that feeling of well-being out into the entire world. Again, beginning small, beginning with continuing small with the people who may be difficult in our lives that we feel some resentment towards, but perhaps are not the most resentful, the person we feel the most resentful towards. That's the way we can help to sort of work with this in our practice. All of these practices can help to transform anger or resentment, hatred, judgmentalism, into more of a feeling of care and connection for others around us. Another key to transforming difficult or unskillful emotions is simply to observe them mindfully, to observe them objectively. Instead of framing them or considering them as mine, that is to say, instead of thinking, I am angry, we frame it differently, as anger is arising, as this is what anger feels like. As if we can objectify it in that way, if we can create that slight amount of distance, then perhaps we can look at it in a more generous light and try to figure out how it's working in us. We might ask ourselves what that emotion really feels like. What does it feel like in us? What does it feel like in our body? Is it pleasant? Is it unpleasant? Where is it felt? How is it felt? Is there something that we're clinging to or resisting that's causing that emotion to arise? As we investigate with curiosity these difficult emotions, we may find that they dissipate on their own and that we're less likely to act out on them in ways that are unskillful. Further, seeing and understanding these emotions as painful, as difficult, as unhelpful, can help to dissipate their power over us over a period of time. And it may indeed be a long period of time. I don't think we should expect to have immediate success here, but if we continue with these kinds of practices, I think over a period of weeks or months, we'll find the emotions diminishing to a degree. Third, I want to discuss coming to a state of equanimity, what's known as upekkha in Pali. The three states we've already described, of kindness, of compassion, of sympathetic joy, are the first three of the four of what are known as the Brahma Viharas in early Buddhist practice. That is, these abodes of the gods, these positive emotional states that we can try to cultivate in order to make our lives better. Now, the fourth of these Brahma Viharas is the state of equanimity. Now, equanimity means different things, many different things in the suttas, but in a nutshell, what it means is a kind of a balanced, calm, quiet state of mind that remains unperturbed in the face of life's highs and lows. It's, I think, well analogized by the Buddha in one of his discourses, his early discourses, which is a discourse to his son Rahula, where he recommends to his son a practice that we might call a kind of an elements meditation, to view the world, to view himself as if he were each one of the major elements. As he says, suppose they were to toss both clean and unclean things on the earth, like feces, urine, spit, pus, and blood. The earth isn't horrified, repelled, and disgusted because of this. In the same way, meditate like the earth. For when you meditate like the earth, pleasant and unpleasant contacts will not occupy your mind. And then the Buddha goes on to give Rahula the same kind of instruction with air, fire, and water. In this way, he's not saying that Rahula should become detached or disinterested, but rather that he should approach life without being overwhelmed by it. We practice so as not to take experiences so personally. We practice so as not to be overwhelmed by our emotions when they arise, and so not allowing ourselves to be carried away by them. We can cultivate this kind of equanimity through a practice of reflection on the impermanent nature of all emotions, as I discussed at the beginning of this video. Through an awareness that all of our emotions, no matter how intense they may appear to us right now, are impermanent and will pass away. We can perhaps reflect on a past time, a time in our lives where we had such an intense emotion and it's no longer with us. It only persisted for a time, even though it seemed to be the entire world for that time. If we can reflect on this way, it may take some of the power away from those emotions. We can also cultivate this equanimity through a practice of regarding both painful and pleasant experiences equally. Now this, I have to say, is not an easy practice. Certainly not one that I would say I am comfortable with in all parts of my life. But nevertheless, it is true that an equanimous approach to life is one that witnesses pleasures and pains in such a way that we do not become attached to the pleasures and we do not reject and flee away from the pains. If we can come to such an understanding, to such an equanimity, even for a moment, it can be a moment of real freedom for us. Fourth, in conclusion, what is the role of emotions in the path of early Buddhism? Emotions are viewed as ordinary, natural parts of our mental environment, things that arise naturally and pass naturally based on causes and conditions. As such, they're all impermanent. They're subject to change and disintegration, and they're best looked upon not as possessions of ours, not as our emotions, not as I am angry, but rather, again, more objectively, simply as things that arise and pass in our mental environment. States of mind that as such do not need to be acted out upon. And the difficult or unskillful emotions, such as hatred, anger, maybe greed, those kinds of things, they can be worked with through these practices of the Brahma Viharas, of kindness, of compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. In all cases, though, working with these emotions in early Buddhism is not a practice of trying to suppress them. Rather, it's a practice of acknowledging them mindfully, working with them, trying to transform them, and then trying to release them. And as always in these kinds of discussions, I want to leave us with a caveat, which is if you've been pursuing these practices and you don't find them helpful, and you find that you are being overwhelmed by difficult or problematic emotional states, then please do seek professional help from a licensed psychologist or therapist in your region. They can be a real help because there's no point in suffering with emotions that can be helped through discussion with somebody who is properly trained. So my question to you is, what tools have helped you to work with your own emotions? How do you manage to stay grounded in the face of your own emotional challenges? I did a series of past videos about these Brahma Viharas, these healthy states of emotion that we try to cultivate in early Buddhist practice, and I'll leave a playlist of those up here on the screen if you would like to hear more about those practices. If you're getting something out of these videos of mine, consider taking a look at my Patreon page, which is linked right up here on the screen and down below in the notes, and see if you want to help support the channel and the work that I'm doing here. Thanks so much, and we'll catch you on the next video, and meanwhile, all of you, be well.